What if the Mongols killed the whole Khwarazmians? In our own timeline, Genghis Khan would manage to unite Mongolia into a single unified nation. Soon thereafter he set his sight on conquest, namely on the Great Jin in northern China and Karakite in Central Asia. This would lead to Mongolia controlling the Silk Road and from there it seeked to strengthen trade with the Khwarazmian Empire in modern-day Iran. But after merchants and his envoys were killed by the Shah, he instead chose to conquer Persia. His conquest is mostly known for its sheer brutality, as up to 90% of the population would perish during this. Many parts still haven't recovered or are even depopulated to this day. But what if that didn't happen? What if the Mongols killed the whole Khwarazmians? In this timeline, after finishing the Khwarazmian Empire, Genghis Khan decides to murder every single last one of its citizens, causing Iran, Afghanistan, and Central Asia to be completely devoid of human life. It is possible that Mongols would settle in this area, but given their short rule over it, not many settlements would exist, if any at all. Both Timur and Babur might not have been born, as they originate from Uzbekistan. Without Babur, the Mughal Empire would never have been formed. The Delhi Sultanate would likely still eventually collapse, and so it might be another state like Bengal, Bahmani, Gujarat, Nalwa or Mir who would unite India instead of the Mughals. Meanwhile, without Timur, the Battle of Ankara wouldn't happen, and thus the Ottoman interregnum wouldn't have happened. This means that the tradition that the Sultan kills most of his sons or brothers might not exist, but it is possible that it would essentially be created by another similar event. Selim's rise to power wouldn't be challenged by his brother, as the Safavids won't support him, and so he can spend another 4 years conquering land. This would likely be directed at the Iranian plateau, which, like Siberia for Russia, is uncontested. And just like with Siberia, the Turks would establish settlements in these empty areas. At the same time, whoever controls India would begin to colonize what used to be Afghanistan, and the Tsardom of Russia would creep into modern-day Kazakhstan. The Ottoman Empire and India would likely base their borders along the mountains in the area, while Central Asia would be like the Balkans, contested between the Ottomans and Russians. Russia would likely eventually end up with the entirety of Central Asia up until reaching the Kopet Dag Mountains. Afghanistan could either become a British vassal or be transferred to the Ottomans in order for British India, which likely still gets formed, and the Russian Empire not to share a border. The Ottoman Empire would ultimately be stronger in this timeline, as these settlements are really start to benefit the empire, especially after the discovery of oil, of which the British likely still want a piece. It is possible that the Ottomans come out on top in the Italo-Turkish War, or at the very least keep the Dodecanes. The First Balkan War could end in a more negotiated peace in which they keep Thrace and Macedonia. Serbia and Montenegro split Sanjak and Greece gets Thessaly, while thanks to Austria-Hungary Albania still gains independence. Bulgaria would be the most unhappy with the results, as they didn't really gain anything at all. The Ottoman Empire would join the Central Powers as in our own timeline, but Bulgaria would join the Entente. A weaker Serbia would fall in 1914, but Bulgaria, Greece, and Romania could together shake up the Balkan front. Russia would still drop out, but the Central Powers would ultimately still lose. Germany and Austria-Hungary would get similar peace deals to our own timeline, but those could be more lenient, as with a stronger Ottoman Empire, the Central Powers didn't lose as hard as they did. In case they didn't own it already, Italy would get Tripolitania and Cyrenaica from the Ottoman Empire. Bulgaria would extend itself into the Ottoman Macedonia and Thrace, while Greece took Thessaloniki and Smyrna. Bulgaria would be the one to establish a united South Slavic nation, namely the Tsardom of Yugoslavia, at the dismay of Serbia. The Turkish War of Independence likely still happens, and in this timeline they also take Iran, as it is mostly Turkish. The United Kingdom, however, would likely get oil concessions from the Turks as compensation. Turkey, however, owns a smaller portion of eastern Thrace. With Yugoslavia being, thanks to Bulgaria, larger, some of its territories could be given to other countries. Banat could go to Romania, Bačka and Prek merge to Hungary, and the littoral and parts of Dalmatia to Italy. In Italy, Mussolini might not rise, as the nation wouldn't feel betrayed by its allies. Without Mussolini's march on Rome, Hitler might not attempt the same in 1923, and thus his party isn't known outside of Bavaria. The Soviet Union would still get established, and Central Asia would be a part of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, as Russian settlers would be its main demographics, like in Siberia. Azuris could also have been victims of the Khwarazmian genocide, and thus it would be populated by Armenians in the west and Russians in the east. In Germany without Hitler, it is possible that the monarchist DNVP manages to become largest force and turn Germany into a monarchy with Wilhelm II as emperor and Alfred Hugenberg as chancellor. Germany would start to violate the Treaty of Versailles, for example by building up its military. Germany would still annex the Saarland, remilitarize the Rhineland and Anschluss Austria. Germany would then demand the Sudetenland, and the Munich Conference still happens. With Italy on their side, the Allies wouldn't abandon their ally, and a war would break out over it. But shortly thereafter Hugenberg would already have been couped by General Hans Oster. He would be forced to abdicate and either go to jail or be executed. Hans Oster would then be the new chancellor. Wilhelm II would also have to abdicate in favor of his grandson, who would be crowned as Wilhelm III. Germany would become less authoritarian, but wouldn't be a full democracy either, and the army would hold a lot of influence in the nation. Germany could eventually become a democracy or remain an autocracy. European colonies would eventually gain independence, but that process would be without a Second World War, significantly slowed down by maybe 25 years. Without a Second World War, the Soviet Union wouldn't control Eastern Europe, and a Cold War wouldn't happen. The United States would remain isolationist to this day. Both Eisenhower and Khrushchev wouldn't rise to prominence, as they gained popularity with the war. Robert Taft could win the election of 1952 and become president, while Georgy Malenkov could become General Secretary of the Soviet Union following Stalin's death. The nuclear bomb would be created much later, potentially by Germany. Without a Holocaust, the creation of Israel might also be less likely, as before World War II, only 1 out of 6 people in Palestine were Jews, which jumped up to 1 out of 3 after the war. Without a Second World War, Japan wouldn't occupy Indochina and wouldn't be sanctioned by the West. Japan would eventually manage to subdue China and become a great power and start a triopoly between Japan, the West, and the Soviet Union. Both Japan and the Soviet Union would support anti-colonial forces, with the Soviets supporting socialist ones and Japan nationalist ones. Without a war with Israel, Egypt might not turn to Arab socialism, and the monarchy endures. This could also result in the same for Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and Tunisia. Iraq would remain in the Arab Federation, which would eventually federalize. Syria might also join it, making it a regional power. With Shiite clerics keeping their privileges, the Yemeni civil war wouldn't happen. Libya would be without Western sanctions or 2 civil wars, as wealthy as a Gulf state. The Vietnam War would be between the French-supported Republic of Vietnam under Ngo Dinh Diem and Japanese-supported Empire of Vietnam under Bao Dai. During the war, China erupted into a full-scale revolt against the Japanese, and the West capitalized on it by supporting China. The Soviets would then launch an invasion of Manchuria and Korea. At the end, China gained independence, the monarchists in Vietnam are beaten, the Soviets establish puppet states in Manchuria and Korea. Japan meanwhile would return to isolation. With the Turkish Iran, the Iranian Revolution and all of its consequences wouldn't have happened. Given that Iraq already controls Khuzestan, a war with its western neighbors is unlikely, but if Iraq were to still go to war, it would get crushed by Turkey and would have to make territorial concession, likely including but not limited to Khuzestan. Bulgarian Yugoslavia might still collapse, with Croatia, Bosnia, Serbia and Montenegro gaining independence, but if Bulgaria holding on to Macedonia, which at this point had already been assimilated into Bulgaria. When the Soviet Union would collapse, the Russian Federation would control Central Asia and Baku, which would give it a lot of power, especially due to their natural resources. With that extra power, Russia might be even more aggressive against its neighbors. 9/11 of any kind and the war on terror wouldn't exist, resulting in a more peaceful Middle East. In this timeline, Turkey would be a giant and powerful nation, as it contains all of modern-day Iran, including its national resources. Turkey would likely also have a huge population, as Turks who settled the area likely had a lot of children to somehow fill that land, and it is over 100 why maybe even over 150 million people. If you liked the episode, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe. Goodbye.